Hey everybody, we're here to go ahead and install this XFX power supply that I have for this build. I'm going to show you how to put a power supply into a chassis, connect all the connectors and the I/O connectors. So I'm going to go in this area right here at the bottom, and you can see there's a little flange that pops out. It's going to sit in between this. Now depending upon your case, it could be a top mount or a front mount. This particular one is a bottom mount, rear facing power supply. You want to make sure you put the power plug and on-off switch towards the back of the case. Go ahead and just slide it up and butt it up against it. We'll make sure it's facing the right direction, which is normally fan facing up. The next step is to go ahead and insert the screws. Now you can see there's a few different screw holes on the back of this case. It'll line up with a couple different ones. It won't be exactly the four corners. In this particular case, you'll see that it'll basically line up with the upper right-hand corner, left-hand corner. The two bottom ones will be in a little bit different of a position. Every power supply manufacturer or type of power supply, I should say, might fit in a little bit differently. So there's multiple screw holes for that type of power supply. Now these are just thumb screws that I'm putting in. You can tighten them down with a Phillips head screwdriver if you're looking to make sure that they're in there nice and tight. We have two more screws to go. Put all four in. Just go ahead and finger tighten them to make sure they're nice and snug. Perfect, we've got the power supply installed into the machine. Now, I have a modular power supply, meaning that all the cables disconnect from the main power supply unit. The next step is to go ahead and put those together. What we're going to do first, though, is we're going to connect the I/O, the front panel connectors. This front thing that I'm connecting right here, this longer cable with the two cables coming out of it, is the USB 3.0 cable connector. It does have a little pin on it. You can see that it faces the correct direction within the slot or port that I'm putting it into. It's going to be this port right here. We also have some of our power reset buttons that we need to put onto the motherboard as well. We'll go right down here on this particular motherboard. It's where a large portion of them go. And here is a USB 2.0. That's going to go in right here. I'm sorry, yeah, USB 2.0. Then we also have our audio jack connector. That's going to go in right here. Now you're going to have two, which will go right down here at the bottom. You see that it's got a two-prong connector on it. Depending upon your motherboard, you might have the HD audio or the AC97. You'll need to make sure that you check that for your particular motherboard to get the correct one. This guide, the motherboard manual, will be your ultimate guide to determining where all this stuff is at. I'll show you exactly how to connect it and some of the basic stuff of the motherboards themselves.
The first thing that we're going to go ahead and connect is this USB 3.0. Now
So the first connector we're going to put in is this USB 3.0. You can see that it's got a blacked out pin here in the corner. That'll match up with the connector on the motherboard. You want to make sure that you don't bend in the pins trying to put this cable in. You want to make sure you put it in the right direction. Now you can't really mess this up because there's also a chuck out or a pin out on this as well. I'm going to go ahead and insert this into the USB 3.0 port on the motherboard. So you want to be firm, but you don't want to be aggressive in trying to put this in. If you kind of rock it back and forth like I'm doing, you'll see that it slides in nice and easy. The next thing we'll be connecting are the power, ground, plus and negative. And I also have this little header here that comes with the motherboard. I'll show you that it actually makes it pretty easy. But on the actual pins down here, it'll have the writing for what they are. And on the actual I/O connector on the front, it'll also have the exact same thing. These should line up almost identically. So you can see that we're just going to line this up and put them on this jumper. So this is the same thing you're going to do to your motherboard. Just make sure you put them on the correct jumper pin for the plus, minus, the ground, the reset,
Line up the pins on the bottom.
the hard drive lights, or any of those things. Now I'm just going to connect that down to the motherboard here.
Now, once you've done that,
That's something that Asus included with their motherboards. It makes it nice and easy when you're installing this. Now I want my computer to be very clean when I run my cable, so I'm going to slide all of the cables back through this grommet as far as I can without
same thing for any other.
putting any unrestriction or force against the actual connection itself.
What you can do is go through and zip tie these later. Now you could run this one up through here as well.
Nothing's worse than having a ton of cables coming through.
Now the USB right here. You can also see that it has a pin.
We're going to go ahead and put in our USB 2.0. You can also see this is a pinout on it as well, which will line up to the connection onto the motherboard. So just make sure you put it in the right direction. Now, a lot of motherboards will have a multiple USB 2.0s on the board itself. Just check to make sure there's not a primary one on there as well. We have our audio connection, and this also has a pinout. See, it's missing one towards the middle. We're going to use the HD audio on this one. We'll go ahead and insert that.
Now the things that we connected were just for the front I/O panel.
And that is all of my front I/O connections to the front of the case connected to the motherboard.
Those cables to the corresponding slot. There's a lot.
Now, if you have any additional items you're going to be attaching to USB 3.0, so it's going to fit into the PCI Express slots, you'll need to connect those to the proper spots on the motherboard if necessary as well.
Down in there as well.
I'm just going to tuck this cable back here through the grommet, so it's nice and clean again. The next step in our process here is to go ahead and connect the cables to the power supply that we'll be using.
We need a few different cables for.
So, kind of adding up what I have within my case, I'll have the 2 video cards, I'll have a hard drive, I'll have motherboard connectors that I'll need. So just making sure that you have all of the power supply that you'll need for your components that you're putting in. There's some things that you have to put in to power your PC on, and that is the CPU power and the motherboard power. Some things you have to have. A PCI Express cable, since I'll be putting in the video cards. They'll have to go in into the motherboard or into the case as well. CPU power, like I was saying. What other cables do we need? We'll need a SATA cable, hard drive. We'll also need a SATA cable to power the CPU cooler that we have.
And just in case we need this, there's another optional CPU cable. You can see this one has a 4-pin.
So we have 2 CPU power cables on this particular CPU or motherboard that we'll need to use to run the voltage of the CPU that we have. You can see that it splits between a 4 and an 8.
So the easiest thing to do first is to go ahead and connect these. Now, when I'm connecting things to my power supply, I always connect it to the one that's
Now,
first.
what I'm going to do is push all of these through this grommet in the back and basically put them through the portions of the case that where they need to go. The first thing that I'm going to connect, or how I'm going to start this, I'm going to start all the way at the back side of the power supply. That'll make it easier to put in the front cables as I go. It's be a little bit tricky, so we'll start at the very bottom down here and work our way up. And this will be the hardest cable to get in. So what I'll be connecting first is a PCI Express cable for the video cards. Now the portions on the power supply, they do have particular cables that go into each slot. Either they're been designated for SATA power, or for PCI Express, or motherboard connection, or CPU. So make sure you put them in the correct slot. You'll see them kind of click into place as well, with the little click on the front, much like you'd see for an Ethernet cable. So we have our power supply for our 2 video cards we'll be putting in. We also need to put in The next one would be for our SATA cables. I also won't use all the slots on this power supply until I expand my machine further. I might use more as we go. CPU power.
Put in our motherboard connectors here.
Our motherboard power, which we'll definitely have to have for our machine to boot.
Start with the lower part first.
It's a split cable, so part will go down here at the bottom, and the second part will go towards the top. Just wiggle it until I can get it to snap into place.
Which fits right into here. Big beefy cable.
Got a lot of cords piling up here.
And our last power cable, in case we need it.
We have an additional CPU power here that we're putting in at the top of the power supply. Whoops, just kicked my camera there.
Now, the majority of these cables are going to be pushed through this grommet.
Let me go ahead and push them all through this grommet.
It's easier to do this now as we connect them. So, go ahead and start pushing them through.
That'll make the build look a lot cleaner when we are finished. If we get them all pushed through.
SATA power is going to go through. Big fat motherboard cable.
We have one unconnect here, unfortunately, so let's go ahead and just put this back in here real fast.
Snap in. Let's try that again. There we go.
The next step will be to connect these to the motherboard, and I'll show you how to do that just real fast as well, where they actually go. Alright, so here is our SATA power that we've run to the top of the case. We need to connect it with the SATA cable here for the CPU. We'll push that back into the back of the case once it's connected. And then we'll zip these cables together. So it's nice and clean and all put into one place. That's the main connections to the motherboard. As I put in the next peripherals, the hard drive and the two video cards, we'll connect those cables to power, or those peripherals to power, as we go. If you want to see the rest of the videos in this series, they'll be down in the description. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.